Let's continue on. We're going to say for each tweets as tweet, echo tweet text. So where are we getting tweet text? Notice each one of these. So let's go into this first object. And notice that we have in reply to lots of information about the data, lots of information about the user, the Twitter account. But if we come down to the bottom, you're going to see another one called text. Now we can access any of these properties of the object by doing this syntax. Object name, arrow, and then the value. So in this case, if we want to grab in reply to user ID, we would simply do that. But let's try this out. So I'm going to remove all of that, and let's see what happens now. Refresh the page, and now can you see that we just have an endless string of all of my recent tweets. So I want to store all of these tweets because ultimately we're going to build up an HTML fragment that we're then going to cache. So let's do that now. I'll create a variable called data, and actually that'll be an array. And now instead of echoing it out, I'm going to add that information to the array. Data equals tweet text. So now add a new item to the array and make that equal to the tweet. Remember, we had this option to specify the number of tweets. Right now, it's going to grab as many as it can, and that default is maybe set to 10 or 15. So we have this number of tweets. So why don't we do this at the very top, and we'll say if number of tweets equals 0, then break. So we're running through this, and we're going to ultimately reduce the number of tweets by 1 for each occurrence. And here we're saying if it's now equal to 0, then we're done. Break out of this for each statement. And here at the bottom we'll say num tweets minus minus. And what this will do is it's going to take that number, and by default that's going to be 5, and every time through the for each statement it's going to reduce it by 1. We can actually combine this. So if I were to do it up here, we're getting the same effect. We read the value of number of tweets and we find out if it's equal to 0, and then we reduce it by 1. Now, if you've ever seen the minus minus come in front, this means first reduce this variable by 1 and then read the number. And that's not what we want in this case. So at this point, we're ready to build up our HTML fragment and save it as metadata for the specific post that we're adding the shortcode to. In this case, it would be the post with a number of 6 or an ID of 6. But now we need to think, how are we going to cache it? There's lots of different ways to cache, but if we're going to use this quick way of caching, we need to do something where we can decide, okay, we're going to cache this every 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or every hour, or what is set by default with tweet reset time. In this case, we set it to 10 minutes. So we need to figure out a way to check the current time. And we'll say when a page is loaded, if the current time is 10 minutes or more from the last time these tweets were attached to the post metadata, in that case, we need to go ahead and update it and fetch new tweets. So let's do that now. Let's attach the current minute that the post was last. Now we'll go ahead and add the first item of the array, and that is going to be the current minute. So when this page is run, it'll be the current minute, and that will be inserted into the database. So let's say the current minute is 3:32. 32 will be attached into the database. Then, when the page is loaded later by anyone else, we're going to run and say, is it 3:42 or later? If it is, we need to get new tweets, but if it's 3:37, it's only been 5 minutes and we can still use the cached tweet. We will go ahead and store that current minute, and we can do this by running date I time. This is a nice little trick to run. When you call date and you pass in time as the second parameter, it's going to use the current time as the basis. And then we can use a handful of different key symbols. In this case, I refers to the minute. If you need to know more, you can simply search for PHP time, and it'll give you a huge list of your options, whether you want to display the hour, the month, the second, the day, the year. In this case, lowercase I will refer to the 2-digit minute of the current hour. So now we've created a new array and we've made it equal to the current minute. In this case, it would be 3:33. But one thing to be aware of is 33 will be the string 33, not the integer 33. So I'm going to fix that right now and make sure I cast that to an integer. Next, let's build up our fragment. So we want to display our tweets within an unordered list. So we'll do that right now. recent tweets, and we're going to add a new item to it, and that's going to be equal to first a UL, and let's go ahead and give it a class name just in case the user wants to style it. And I'm going to use JW tweets. Next, we're going to have a list item. And here's a trick you can use. Rather than doing another for each statement, you can use implode. And what implode will do is it's going to take an array and turn it into a string. But the first parameter you pass to implode will be what do you want to use as the separator. So often you'll do a comma, and that'll turn an array, and it'll echo out all of the items in that array as a string, with each one being separated by a comma. But watch what happens if we use a closing list item and an opening list item as the separators. The second parameter for implode is going to be what array are we working on. Put that in right there. And then finally, let's close out our last list item and close out our closing UL. So this is a way to get rid of a for each statement. You create your opening UL, you create the very first list item, and then you take all of those items in the array and you echo them out, but each one is going to end with a list item and an opening list item. And then when you get to the very last one, we just need to close that last list item and close out the UL. Good, so now we have this array. Let's go ahead and cache this and attach it to the post. That way we don't have to stress out the Twitter API every single time somebody loads our page. Once again, going with the each function gets its own idea, we'll create a new function and that'll be called cache. Now, what are we caching? We're going to cache the recent tweets. Let's create that function now. Function cache, and that's going to accept the recent tweets. So now at this point, I want you to remember that recent tweets is an array. The first one is going to be equal to the current minute, and the second one is going to be equal to the tweet HTML fragment. So first, to attach post data, we can call the WordPress function add post meta. Now this function is going to accept 3 parameters. The first one it needs to know is what is the ID of the post that we're attaching meta information to. Well, we can grab that, but first we need to go up and say global. Go up and get the global ID for the post. We need to provide a name to this metadata. We'll call it JW recent tweets. You can name that anything you want. It's simply an identifier. And next, what are we adding? Recent tweets. So when this function runs, it's going to get the global ID for the post, and we're going to attach this array to the current post, and we're going to assign an ID of JW recent tweets to it. And now we're done. So let's come back up. And now we've successfully cached that information. The last step is we need to return. So I will return, and we need to figure out how we're going to do this. For now, if we want to return this fragment, we need to return not recent tweets, because remember, recent tweets is an array. Instead, we want to return the first item in it, not the 0 item, the first. And that will be equal to this fragment that you see right here. So let's try this out alone. Reload the page, and now we do get a parse error, unexpected semicolon on line 41. And what we can see here is it came to a semicolon when it was expecting another closing parentheses. So if we look through all of this, we have date and we open it up. Then for the first parameter, that's fine. Then for the second parameter, but we never closed that opening paren. So let's close that now and try it again. So now it seems to not be working. It seems that we're doing that right here, but note we're returning recent tweets from the fetch tweets. So now if we go back, what function called fetch tweets? This right here, that is being stored within tweets. We just need to attach this fragment to what we already have here. So we'll return tweets, and then maybe we'll also store this follow me fragment within its own paragraph tag. So let's try this out. I'm going to refresh the page, and sure enough, we have our post, and then we have a list of recent tweets. So you can run this here, my tweets. And now, anyone who uses this shortcode can simply call the Twitter shortcode and pass in show tweets, and they're getting it. Now, what I want you to be aware of, though, is every single time we are fetching those tweets from the API, and you're not going to be able to do that over and over, especially if you have a decent amount of traffic. even though we have attached, if we come down to the cache function, even though we've added post metadata, we're doing that every single time. Now, when the page loads, we need to see if there's any metadata available for us, because if there is, and it hasn't been too long, then we never need to run this curl function and we can load the page much more quickly.